The rooftop terrace of the downtown building, where I had dedicated the last 7 years of my career, buzzed with the clinking of glasses, lively laughter, and the smooth rhythms of jazz playing softly in the background. The sunset painted the city skyline with a warm orange glow as my colleagues raised their champagne flutes to celebrate to Kelly. Hannah, my closest friend at the firm, toasted, lifting her glass high. From entry-level analyst all the way to senior strategy director, you've earned every bit of this. A ripple of cheers followed, and I smiled deeply, feeling my heart swell with pride. This promotion wasn't just a change in title. It was a milestone, a confirmation that all those late nights, missed birthdays, and weekends spent buried in pitch decks had finally paid off. Scanning the crowd, my gaze met Vincent's, my boss, the man who had hired me and once inspired my admiration. He raised his glass with a tight, forced smile, but quickly looked away. It felt odd. Then again, Vincent had been acting off for weeks. Once my mentor, we had worked closely on major client deals, and he had praised my instincts and leadership lately, though. He'd become cold, distant, curt in meetings, even dismissive. At first, I assumed the pressure from the board was weighing on him. Q3 had been rough, but something told me there was more beneath the surface. Still, I wasn't about to let his bad mood ruin this night. This was my moment. Until it wasn't just as I set my glass down and turned to accept another congratulations. Vincent's voice rose over the music. "Everyone," he called, stepping to the center of the terrace and tapping a spoon against his glass. "May I have your attention for one last announcement?" A hush fell over the crowd. He paused, lingering too long in the silence, savoring it. My stomach twisted. Turning to me, a barely hidden smirk playing on his lips, he said, "Kelly, you've had your celebration. Now it's time to say goodbye. Your position is terminated. Effective Friday." The room froze. A few gasps escaped my mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. He pressed on. "We're restructuring," he explained. "Your duties will be reassigned across the leadership team. Nothing personal, just business. I wanted to give you a proper send-off." He raised his glass again, but the energy had drained away. Music continued faintly, but the atmosphere was dead. I looked at my colleagues, some frozen in disbelief, others avoiding eye contact. Hannah's face had gone pale. I should have broken down. I should have screamed. I should have demanded an explanation. But instead, I smiled. "No problem," I said quietly. Vincent blinked, clearly thrown off. He expected drama. A scene maybe humiliating me in front of everyone was supposed to make him feel powerful. Maybe he thought I'd beg or plead to keep the title he'd just ripped away. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. "Friday, then," I added. "I'll be out by the end of the day." Then I turned back, lifted my glass, and took one last sip of champagne. The night ended awkwardly. People left early, some whispering apologies, others just vanishing. Vincent disappeared too, but I stayed until the string lights dimmed and the staff began clearing away plates. Because what Vincent didn't know, and no one else at the party did, was that I had seen this coming weeks before. I'd overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear late at night in the hallway. While working in the next room, Vincent was on a whispered phone call, talking about phasing me out, stressing optics, saying we'd let me enjoy the party before cutting me loose. He thought he was clever, but he didn't realize I had already taken quiet, strategic steps. So when he said Friday, I already knew what was coming, and more importantly, what I was going to do. This wasn't just about a job. It was about respect, betrayal, and being discarded once you're no longer convenient. And people like Vincent always underestimate the quiet ones Friday was coming. But what he didn't see was that by then, it would already be too late. The elevator doors whispered shut behind me the next morning as I stepped onto my office floor Thursday. Just one day left before the clock ran out, As I walked past the cubicles, my coworkers avoided my eyes. Some typed furiously, pretending not to notice me. Others gave me cautious, sympathetic looks. Unsure whether to speak or stay silent, I didn't blame them. This place thrived on silence. Not loyalty, not honesty, just quiet compliance. That's how Vincent maintained his hold on power for so long he didn't need to be liked. He needed to be feared. I sat at my desk, powered on my monitor, and saw my inbox flooded with HR paperwork, calendar updates, transition forms, all cold, clinical, a digital farewell. I opened each file, reviewed it carefully, and filed it away methodically. Then I accessed my personal drive hidden inside a secure, encrypted folder was everything I had been quietly building over the past 2 months, a detailed audit of Vincent's financial dealings within the company. To be clear, I hadn't gone searching for revenge. I stumbled upon it by accident 2 months ago. While working late reviewing budget reallocations for our Singapore expansion, I noticed unusual adjustments Vincent had made. Large sums flowing through shell vendors that made no sense. It was sloppy, and I had questions. When I confronted him the next morning, he waved it off. "Just streamlining expenses," he said. "Don't worry about it." But I did worry because I recognized that tone. The one that said, "Don't ask questions because you wouldn't understand the answer." So, I started saving files and building a timeline, quietly and carefully. I cross-referenced invoices, matched payment histories, and checked vendor addresses. One vendor's office was listed as a frozen yogurt shop in Montana. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Vincent was funneling company money through ghost vendors, rerouting funds, inflating costs, padding expense reports. It was subtle enough that only someone deeply involved in the project would notice. Someone like me, I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I reached out to a lawyer, Teresa, a sharp corporate whistleblower attorney recommended by a grad school friend. She told me exactly what to do. Document everything, create an unbreakable trail, and above all, don't tip your hand until you're ready. So, I followed her advice, built the file, time-stamped every detail, and made 3 copies. One on a secure cloud server, one printed and sealed in an envelope, and one saved to a USB drive that never left my handbag. By the time Vincent stood up at my party with that smug little grin and his "Your time is up" speech, I already had my finger on the trigger, and he didn't even realize it. At lunchtime, I crossed the street to a coffee shop I used to love before those late nights stole all my free time. Hannah was waiting at a corner table, her expression tight with worry. "I still can't believe he did that," she said, barely touching her sandwich. "Right there in public, like you were some temp who messed up a spreadsheet." "Vincent's never been subtle," I replied, stirring my coffee. "He wanted it to sting." "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, confused. "You just smiled." "That actually scared him," I said with a faint smile. "He looked totally thrown off." Hannah gave me a knowing look. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "I'm just getting ready for my exit," I said casually, "making sure my house is in order." She raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" I glanced out the window. "Probably not, but you'll find out soon enough." After lunch, I went back to the office and printed a neat, professional transition report. It covered every project I'd worked on. Status updates, key contacts, passwords. Everything needed to keep things running smoothly after I was gone. A carefully wrapped roadmap of my work. But it wasn't generosity. It was a statement. Because when the storm hit, I wanted it to be crystal clear. I had done everything right. Left no mess, no loose ends. And still, they chose to humiliate me. That afternoon, an automated calendar invite from HR popped into my inbox. Final exit interview, Friday at 3 p.m., neatly scheduled like I was just another file being deleted. But what HR didn't realize was that by 3 p.m. on Friday, the entire system would be under scrutiny. Vincent had picked Friday to clean house. I had picked Friday to burn it down. The fuse had already been lit. Friday morning came like any other. The city woke with its usual buzz, traffic, coffee carts, elevator dings. But for me, the air felt different, charged, like a storm quietly building beneath a calm sky I dressed carefully. Black blazer, simple gold earrings, and a deep blue blouse. My calm before the storm outfit. The elevator ride to the 21st floor felt longer than usual, even though I'd taken it countless times before. But this time, it wasn't just going to work. I was coming to finish what I'd started walking into the office. I was met with a few nods, half smiles, and a quiet tension hanging thick in the air. Rumors had already started swirling since the party. Nobody knew exactly what had happened, just that something was off. Even Vincent had been strangely quiet, barely seen in the halls, speaking only through his assistant. By 9 a.m., I was at my desk, sipping coffee and putting the final pieces in place. The transition file was printed and bound, the USB drive with the financial evidence rested safely in my purse, and the sealed envelope containing my full report on Vincent's misconduct, addressed to the board's ethics committee, was tucked in my top desk drawer, ready to be delivered. Then, at 9:15 a.m., the first sign arrived. Vincent stormed out of his office, slamming the door so hard the noise echoed through the floor. His face was flushed, jaw clenched tight. He barked orders at his assistant before disappearing down the stairwell. I didn't need to ask what happened. I already knew 10 minutes earlier the board had received an anonymous tip, the kind with names, dates, wire transfers, and supporting documents. The kind you can't ignore. And that tip came from me, from a secure email, with attachments carefully crafted so they couldn't be traced back to my work account, along with a final note. I trust the board will know what to do with this information before legal authorities need to be involved, subtle enough to keep it internal, strong enough to make them sweat. By 10 a.m., the company's general counsel had arrived. Barbara, a woman I'd met twice over the years. She wasn't involved in daily affairs. She handled crises. Vincent certainly hadn't expected one around 11 a.m. I was called into an early check-in meeting with HR, well before my scheduled exit interview. Denise from HR greeted me with a stiff smile, fingers tightly clasped together. "Kelly," she said, "thank you for coming in. We just wanted to check how you're holding up, given everything going on." "I'm doing fine," I replied calmly, folding my hands. "It's been a productive week." She shifted uneasily. "We want to make sure you aren't leaving with the wrong impression. The decision to terminate your role was part of a larger restructure." "Of course," I said evenly. "Just business, right?" Her smile twitched, but there was something different in her eyes now. Not pity or warmth, but caution, as if she didn't know what I knew but could feel the heat rising. HR can always smell when trouble's coming. They just never know where the fire will start until it's at their feet. I gave them nothing. I stayed polite, cooperative, professional, because that only made the fire burn hotter. By noon, I was back at my desk. Vincent hadn't been seen for over an hour. His office lights were off, and his assistant was gone. Slack messages started quietly buzzing. Did Vincent get called to a board meeting? Why is legal here? Something's happening. They were right at 12:45 p.m. I got a text from an unknown number. "We received your report. Please do not leave the building before speaking with our committee representative board compliance office." I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked my phone. They had it. The report was in motion. At 2:30 p.m., I headed toward the conference room for my exit interview, the same one Vincent had smugly arranged for me earlier in the week. Only this time, Vincent wasn't there to oversee it. When I opened the door, Denise was already seated, but she wasn't smiling anymore. Next to her sat a tall man in a gray suit, serious, silent, watching me carefully. "Kelly," he said, standing, "I'm James Price, internal counsel for the board." I'd like to ask you a few questions before we proceed with your departure paperwork. Of course, I replied smoothly, taking a seat. I'm happy to answer whatever you need. He didn't smile. Instead, he opened a folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, one of my attachments printed in color, time-stamped, and marked confidential. The fuse was lit, and the explosion was just beginning. The silence in the conference room was so thick, I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall behind me. James Price wasted no time on small talk. "We've reviewed your report," he said, voice steady and controlled. "What you provided is extensive." I nodded. It had to be Denise from HR sat frozen beside him, hands clenched tightly in her lap. This wasn't merely an exit interview anymore. It had become a legal briefing, and everyone in that room was well aware of it. James went on. "The financial documents you provided point to serious breaches of fiduciary duty. Some might even qualify as fraud if confirmed." "They've already been confirmed," I answered evenly. "Just review the audit trail in our internal system. I made sure everything was properly time-stamped and logged. These files aren't opinions. They're the company's official records." He studied me silently for a while. I met his eyes steadily. "What exactly do you hope to achieve with this, Kelly?" he finally asked. "I'm not after anything," I said, folding my hands calmly on the table. "I'm leaving today as planned. I have no desire to drag this through the media or bring down the company." "Then why send it at all?" "Because if I hadn't, no one else would have. And because people like Vincent shouldn't be allowed to ruin careers for amusement and walk away scot-free." A brief pause filled the room. James nodded slowly and shut his folder. "We appreciate your discretion," he said. "The board is launching an emergency inquiry immediately. Vincent's financial authorizations have been frozen, and a deeper audit has begun. We'll need you available for follow-up questions in the coming weeks." I stood, slinged my bag over my shoulder, and said, "You know where to reach me." Exiting the conference room, I carried the same calm confidence with which I'd entered. But this time, I wasn't simply the woman being escorted out. I was the one who had swung open the door and let the truth flood in by 4 p.m. Whispers had grown loud. Someone in accounting leaked that Vincent had been quietly escorted out, not by security, but through the parking garage under the guise of a personal emergency. But it was anything but personal. It was official. The executive floor was sealed off for internal meetings. Legal teams were scouring his office, pulling emails, collecting devices meanwhile. The staff buzzed with speculation. What happened? Did Vincent get caught? Is that why Kelly's been so calm all week? I didn't utter a word I didn't have to people were piecing it together on their own. The way Vincent blindsided me at the party, my lack of reaction, my composed daily presence around 4:30 p.m. Hannah slid into the seat beside me at the cafe, eyes wide. "Vincent's gone," she whispered, like really gone. "They're wiping his emails. No one's saying anything outright, but I know." "Wait, you knew?" I asked quietly, looking at her. "You asked if I was planning something." Her jaw dropped open. "Holy crap, Kelly, what did you do?" I gave her a faint smile. I told her the truth. At 5 p.m., I packed up, not into some cardboard box, but into my usual sleek work bag. No theatrics, no scene, just a quiet walk to the elevator. As the doors began to close, a familiar voice stopped me. "Kelly, wait." I turned around to see Barbara, the general counsel, stepping into the elevator clutching a folder. "I wanted to catch you before you left," she said. "The board meets late tonight. We're launching a formal misconduct investigation into Vincent. What you provided will probably trigger SEC reporting." I said nothing, letting the silence do the talking. She handed me the folder. "This is your formal whistleblower protection notice. It shields you from retaliation, even though you're technically leaving if you ever want to come back in any role." "Thank you," I said, sliding it into my bag. But I think I've already outgrown this place. She smiled. Probably right. The elevator opened onto the cool evening, and as I stepped out, I glanced back at the glass tower behind me, the building where I'd invested 7 years. My energy, my ideas, the place that tried to bury me with a smile and a party. But I hadn't been buried. I'd been planted. Now, the roots of truth were breaking through the surface. By Monday morning, the storm went public. The news broke shortly after 9 a.m., tucked halfway down a financial news roundup, but impossible to miss. Internal investigation launched into executive misconduct at Stratwell and Company. It didn't name Vincent explicitly, but those who worked there didn't need names. The wording said it all. Unauthorized financial activity, whistleblower report, board audit initiated, senior executive placed on immediate administrative leave. The article was short, clinical, and heavy with meaning. Inside the office, the mood shifted. The same people who'd stayed silent when Vincent fired me were suddenly energized. Slack channels lit up, gossip turned to feverish speculation, and the name on everyone's lips. Mine, I wasn't there, naturally. No reason to be, my contract ended Friday. I was no longer an employee, but that didn't mean I was gone by midday. 3 LinkedIn messages arrived from coworkers, once whispers, now loud declarations. I wish I'd stood up for you sooner. What you did was courageous. If you're planning the next move, count me in. I'm done staying silent. You pushed me to leave too. Thank you. One message stood out. A woman named Erica, someone I barely knew from another department. We'd only exchanged brief words. Kelly, you don't know me, but I worked under Vincent for 5 years. He stole credit for my work more times than I can count. I thought I was imagining things. I thought I was crazy. But what you did proved I wasn't. Thank you. I stared at her words for a long time, then replied simply, You're not crazy. You were just trapped in the wrong system. Keep going. It hit me then. This wasn't about me alone anymore. It was about all the overlooked, silenced people who just wanted to do their jobs in a place that treated them like they were disposable. And now that place was crumbling by Tuesday. The board released an internal memo admitting serious failures in financial oversight. Vincent's name was finally named. He'd been officially terminated. Pending legal review, they used terminated, not resigned. That difference spoke volumes that same day. Hannah called in disbelief. They're overhauling everything, she said. New policies, revamped expense reviews, mandatory ethics training. They've even hired an external firm to audit vendor contracts. Sounds like damage control, I said, pacing my apartment. It is, but it's real. For once, they're scared. People are finally speaking up. I didn't voice it, but I felt it deeply. The system was breaking, and I'd been the first blow of the hammer, the best part. I wasn't done yet. While Stratwell and Company scrambled to contain the fallout from its mess, I was already in talks with 3 different firms. Each knew the news, and more importantly, each was impressed by how I had handled myself through it all. One firm, a rising consultancy called Alira Partners, reached out personally. Their CEO, Naomi, a formidable woman, requested a private meeting during our Zoom call. She said, I read between the lines you kept your composure through a hostile takedown without turning it into a vendetta. That kind of grace is rare. I wasn't after revenge, I told her. I was seeking accountability. There's a difference. She smiled warmly. Exactly what we need here. We've quietly been building a leadership program for women in strategic roles, and I want you to help lead it. By Thursday, I had signed a new contract, better pay, a higher title, and a leadership role with real impact. Alira gave me a private office, a genuine seat at the table, and a platform to create meaningful change. But the best moment came the following Friday, exactly 1 week after my so-called promotion party. That morning, Stratwell and Company released a formal press statement. We acknowledge the valuable contributions of Kelly Harmon during her tenure at Stratwell and Company. Her unwavering commitment to ethical standards and accountability has driven significant organizational changes that we are dedicated to maintaining moving forward. It wasn't much far from what I deserved, but it was public permanent. And for the first time in 7 years, the company spoke my name aloud and attached it to something they respected. It was more than vindication. It was a turning point that afternoon. In my new office overlooking the city skyline, I sipped tea from a proper mug, no more paper cups from the old break room, and smiled. Some stories don't end with the villain's fall. Some begin when the survivor rises, tells the truth, and builds something stronger than what was stolen. 3 months after that rooftop night, the night Vincent toasted my promotion, then publicly fired me, I stepped onto a stage I never imagined, the annual Women in Leadership Summit, packed with industry pros, executives, and young women eager to rise without falling the way. Many of us had my name was printed on the agenda, just below the keynote speakers. Kelly Harmon, former director, whistleblower, now partner at Alira. Waiting backstage for my introduction, I reflected on the surreal journey here. One moment, I was sipping champagne while a man stripped me of my job the next. I was forging a future that no one could take away, because this time it was mine from the ground up. As I stepped into the spotlight, applause filled the hall, but it wasn't polite clapping. It felt electric, genuine, as if the room already knew the story or had lived one like it themselves. I scanned the faces, took a breath, and began. I was fired the same night I was celebrated, I said, facing the very people who had raised their glasses to me minutes before. Gasps and nods rippled through the crowd. People leaned in. But what my boss didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had already prepared for this moment, not out of bitterness or paranoia, but because deep down I understood I was working somewhere that valued power over people. I shared the story carefully. Omitting names, I spoke of the financial misconduct, the humiliation, and the quiet planning behind the scenes. I described the difference between silence and speaking up, and the cost of both. But more than anything, I spoke about value. Too often, I said, we're told to be grateful, keep our heads down, and avoid making waves, especially women, especially when we reach for more. But gratitude shouldn't be a leash, and silence shouldn't be the price of survival. When I finished, the standing ovation was immediate. It wasn't about me. It was about everything that moment stood for. The woman who didn't just survive a takedown, but turned it into a platform. After the speech, dozens approached me, some to thank me, others to share their own stories. One woman stood out, a young project manager with tired eyes and a hesitant smile who pulled me aside. "I've been documenting everything," she whispered. "He takes credit for my work constantly. He says I'm too ambitious, but hearing you today, I'm going to speak up." I squeezed her hand. "You're not alone. You never were. Just be smart, be careful, and know your worth." That evening, back at Alira, I debriefed with Naomi, my CEO and partner in change. She listened quietly as I told her about the summit. "Your story is spreading," she said. "Not just in women's circles. I got a call this morning from one of Stratwell's board members. They want help developing a real ethics program." I raised an eyebrow. "The same board that let Vincent run wild for years?" "The very same," she said. "Looks like they're trying to course correct late, but still. They want to meet." I smiled, not smugly, but with the clarity of someone who finally grasped the depth of her impact. "I'll meet with them," I said, "but on one condition." Naomi tilted her head. "They acknowledge in writing the people they silenced. Not just me, but everyone buried beneath Vincent's ego. I want real reform, not empty promises. Naomi grinned. I had a feeling you'd say that. Sitting in my office, city lights glowing outside the window, I took a moment to reflect I wasn't the same woman who'd walked into Stratwell 7 years ago, eager to prove herself to a man who saw her as disposable. I wasn't fighting for a seat at someone else's table anymore. I had built my own. And in the end, Vincent became exactly what he tried to make of me, a cautionary tale, because he taught people how not to lead, and I showed them what happens when you refuse to stay silent. The truth is, not all victories are loud. Some come wrapped in silence, in thorough documentation, in quiet resilience. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is recognition that you were never the problem. The system was recognition that your voice mattered, even when it trembled. Recognition that standing up for yourself doesn't make you difficult. It makes you dangerous to those who rely on silence to survive. And that's a story worth telling forever.